Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski and I am joined today by William Duguid, writer and political blogger. Lovely to have you.
Lovely to be back. Thank you very much.
For our first story, we've got our Ukraine update, day 827 of a conflict. Sweden's gift of ASC-890 surveillance aircraft is being seen as a big lift to Ukraine's defenses. It will be the first time Ukraine has had such capability since the fall of the Soviet Union. Sweden's defense minister, Pal Johnson, said the aircraft would be useful for Ukraine's air defense, enabling it to identify incoming cruise missiles and drones and identify targets both on the ground and at sea. The ASC-890 can spot threats hundreds of kilometers away and send the information via data link to the F-16 fighter jets that Ukraine will receive from allies. Two ferries were damaged in Ukrainian missile attacks that hit Kerch, occupied Crimea. On Wednesday night, Russian authorities have said the bridge to Russia, successfully bombed by Ukraine in the past, was temporarily closed. The Kerch Bridge, built on Vladimir Putin's orders after the illegal occupation of Crimea, is a prime target that Ukraine's military has said must be destroyed. Russian missiles hit Kharkiv city and the region this morning, injuring 4 people, according to early reports from Ukrainian officials. American weapons being delivered to Kiev were helping stabilize the front in Ukraine amid intensifying Russian attacks, Antony Blinken said on Wednesday. The White House has so far discouraged the Ukrainians from using US weapons for direct attacks on Russia. Asking about this while visiting neighborhood Moldova, Blinken said, I think what you've seen over the 2+ years, as the nature of the battlefield has changed, as the locations, the means that Russia is employing changed, we've adapted and adjusted to that. That's exactly what we'll be doing going forward, he said. The U.S. Army inaugurated a new artillery factory in Mesquite, Texas, on Wednesday, marking a significant step in producing more 155mm artillery. The plant, managed by General Dynamics, is part of a broader effort by the Army to modernize production. Mediazona, a Russian outlet that tracks war casualties using open sources, has identified nearly 5,000 Russian soldiers under the age of 24 who have died in the war, including 1,400 under the age of 20. On Friday, NATO foreign ministers will debate how to put military aid for Ukraine on a longer-term footing. The proposals are due to be agreed at a NATO summit in Washington in July. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has proposed that NATO take on coordination of international military aid for Ukraine and has proposed allies make a big multi-year financial pledge of military aid. NATO leadership will have to overcome resistance from a pro-Putin Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who has made clear his country will not take part in new efforts. Chinese support is helping Russia with its long-range missiles, artillery, and drone capabilities, and its ability to track battlefield movements. Kurt Campbell, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, said in Brussels on Wednesday. Campbell also said there was an urgent need for European and NATO countries to send a collective message of concern to China about its actions, which we view are destabilizing in the heart of Europe. We see this as a matter of utmost urgency, he said. That's Kurt Campbell, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State. I'm sorry. Russian strikes killed almost two civilian. Russian strikes killed 2 civilians in the city of Nikopol in southern Ukraine on Wednesday. Regional Governor Serhiy Lysyk said. Nikopol is across the river from the Russian-occupied Zaporizhia nuclear power plant and regularly hit by Russian artillery fire. William, passing over to you, what do
Thank
you
you.
think these Ukraine updates mean for the conflict?
Well, the conflict goes on, and we're seeing now the assistance from the West particularly the US, but also, as you mentioned first there, Sweden coming through. And that could make a difference to the immediate bit of the war where Russia has been gaining ground for a little while. There is still, I think, a swirling debate going on, and America is still staying well short of this, of the NATO provided weapons being used on Russia itself, which would be, I think, a significant escalation. But I think we're beginning to see it turn more into a proxy, not proxy war, but proxy Cold War, perhaps, between the West and Russia as the geopolitical scene begins to evolve. And uh, I think I meant to mention China there. That's it. When you mention geopolitics, you always have to mention China. And there is some concern about how China is furnishing Russia with weapons. So I think that will be one of the developments of the coming months. But in the immediate future, I think we've got something probably of a stalemate as the Western aid now begins to hold back the Russian advances, and we see what happens as we go into the summer.
Thank you, William. For our Israel and Gaza update, at least 36,224 Palestinians have been killed and 81,777 wounded in Israeli attacks on Gaza since the October 7th since October 7th, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Israel is in effective control of Gaza's entire land border after taking control of a buffer zone along the border with Egypt. Israel's military has said, a move that risks complicating its relationships with Egypt. In a televised briefing on Wednesday, Chief Military Spokesperson Daniel Hagari said Israel forces had gained operational control over the Philadelphia corridor using the Israelis' military code name for the 14-kilometer long corridor along the Gaza Strip's only border with Egypt. Egypt has rejected Israel's claims of smuggling tunnels running beneath the buffer zone. Al Qahira News reported that Israel was using claims of tunnels under Egypt's border with Gaza as cover for its Rafah offensive. Israeli forces say they killed about 300 Palestinian gunmen during an operation in the southern Gaza city of Rafah, launched on the 6th of May. Israeli government spokesperson David Mencer said today. Rafah residents reported intense artillery shelling and gunfire today. On the ground in the Gaza Strip, witnesses reported fighting in central and western Rafah, according to the Agence France Presse, AFP, the charity. The charity Action Aid described Israeli military pressing on with its ground invasion of Rafah as a flagrant disregard of a binding ICJ ruling issued on the 24th of May. An AFP correspondent reported artillery and gunfire on Gaza City's southern neighborhood of Zaytun in the territory's north, where witnesses saw thick plumes of smoke rising from Jabalia refugee camp and Beit Lahia. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi urged the international community to ensure Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are not displaced from their war-ravaged territory. Sisi also called for the international community to stop any attempt at forcing Palestinians to forcibly flee their land. A car ramming attack killed 2 Israeli soldiers near the city of Nablus in the occupied West Bank, the Israeli army said early today. EU workers staged a silent protest over the continuing attacks on Rafah outside the main institutional buildings in Brussels today. Some held banners declaring civil servants demand ceasefire in Gaza, while others called for the end to EU-Israel agreements that don't respect EU values. Janez Lenarchich, the European Commissioner for Crisis Management, called on Israel to stop its campaign against UNRWA. More than 16,000 people are now living in Deir al-Bala school, the UN agency for Palestinian refugees, UNRWA, said today. Humanitarian aid for Gaza is continuing to depart Cyprus by sea and will be held in floating storage until a US built military pier undergoes repairs. A Cypriot spokesperson said on Thursday. A Cypriot spokesperson said on Thursday. Efforts by Israel's intelligence agencies to undermine and influence the International Criminal Court, ICC, could amount to offenses against the administration of justice and should be investigated by its chief prosecutor, legal experts have said. Chinese President Xi Jinping today called for a peace conference on the war between Israel and Hamas in an address to Arab leaders. William, what are your thoughts on the developments in Israel and Gaza?
Well, the offensive on Rafah continues, and it doesn't seem really that anything anybody says, whether it's the ICJ or anybody else, is going to stop it. Um, Obviously, there's a concern for life and limb for people who are under bombardment, and we've seen some pretty horrific examples of that in recent days. Um, in the background also, though, there's the problem with potential starvation, because now that Israel has effective control of Gaza's entire land border, it's up to them whether any aid gets in. And as at the same time, the temporary pier that was built by the US is non-functional, and we don't know when it will be functional again. Hopefully not before too long. And it's all very well to have the aid out at sea, having been sent from Cyprus, but it needs actually to get to land. And if it doesn't, I fear a rapidly deteriorating situation. But we simply watch this and watch it unfold, and can only hope that something comes along to change things and to make things better, because at the minute, I have to say, there isn't really much sign of that at all.
Thank you, William. Shifting our focus to our general election coverage, we're starting off with Labour's Diane Abbott, who has accused Labour of carrying out a cull of left wingers after she and others were blocked or dissuaded from standing for the party. Two more left wing Labour candidates were blocked or dissuaded by the names of Faiza Shaheen, who was Labour's candidate in Chingford and Woodford Green, and Lloyd Russell Moyle, who had been the MP for Brighton Kemp Town since 2017. Angela Rayner has defied Keir Starmer by backing Diane Abbott in the general election. When Darren Jones, the shadow chief secretary to the Treasury, was asked whether Labour was purging the left, he said, "I don't think that's true. I mean, there are many colleagues of mine in the Parliamentary Labour Party who would define themselves as being on the left, who are endorsed by the Labour Party candidates, who are endorsed Labour Party candidates, and are standing in their constituency." William, asking you, is there a factional war happening in the Labour Party?
It looks very much as if there is, and it's very much to do with the people who've supported Jeremy Corbyn, such as Diane Abbott and Faiza Shaheen, being sidelined, in Diane Abbott's case treated, I think, quite appallingly, with mixed messaging about the restoration of the whip, and then the possibility that she might be able to retire with sort of everybody saying how well she done, only for a briefing against any possibility of her even considering standing suddenly coming out. There is something definitely going on, and I think it's maybe not an all-out war against perhaps left-wingers, but it is a situation where it looks as if social media is being minutely searched for anything that can be used against somebody. And certainly that seems to be what's happened to Faiza Shaheen, who was a very good candidate for Labour in 2019, because she was not that far off from defeating Ian Duncan Smith in the Chingford Woodford Green seat. And she would have high hopes, I think, of displacing him this time. But as it turns out, she's off the list, and we don't know who's on the list. And so it goes on, and we don't really know. And the voters, maybe they're not really taking too much account of it yet, but they should be. The voters really aren't sure of what the Labour Party currently stands for, and that's as true of voters in Scotland as anywhere else.
Just to explore something you said there, you view this as you view this potentially as Labour just shielding themselves from potential threats and potential attacks down the line, kind of similar to maybe Tony Blair's strategy of carrying a Ming vase over a very slippery floor, I believe his quote was. Is that what you see this as?
Yes, that would work just fine if actually Keir Starmer intended to follow relatively progressive policies when he got into power. So it's just a means of getting into power, and you don't make any major blunders, perhaps. But actually sidelining some of your more prominent potential candidates and other figures who seem to be relatively blameless is actually quite damaging to the party. So there's that side of the coin as well. So maybe they're not being all that careful with their reputation. So that's something they need to perhaps to watch.
Thank you, William. Sticking with Labour, we've got Elizabeth Carr Ellis has been picked to stand in the new Angus and Perthshire Glens constituency at the upcoming general election by Labour, despite currently being a councillor in Canterbury, Kent, the Courier has revealed. SNP's Dave Dugan, who is currently the MP for Angus, has declared this decision insulting to the people of his constituency. William, does it matter that Elizabeth Carr Ellis was set to represent an English council, and what does this mean for her ability to represent Angus and Perthshire Glens?
Well, I think she'll be operating under instructions to a certain extent, so perhaps that doesn't matter. What it does seem to point to me is one, a shortage of talent, possibly in the ranks of the party that calls itself Scottish Labour, but isn't a separate Scottish party really at all. Surely there would be people more local to Perthshire, Angus, Glens, or even just Scotland, who could fill that gap. But it seems it's not. It seems it's not. And the same thing is happening in other seats as well. So that is an issue potentially.
Thank you, William. Shifting to the Conservatives, the former Conservative MP Mark Logan has said he is backing Labour at the next general election, saying the party will bring back optimism into British life. In an exclusive interview with the BBC, Conservative MP Mark Logan, who represented Bolton North East for the Tories until Parliament dissolved on Thursday, said Labour had been on a journey and now offered centrist politics. William, what is this is the second big party switch, I believe, between Conservative and Labour. What does this mean for both the Labour and Conservative Party?
There's been quite a number in the past. It's just that the second recent one,
Recent,
the
yes, of
most
course.
headline one, of course, was Natalie Elphicke in the last couple of weeks. And Labour have very deliberately moved to become a centrist and possibly even mild right wing party in order to capture back some of the centrist voters, as they perceive, who they lost in 2019. And so that is definitely something that's happening. And there is a price to be paid by doing that. It remains to be seen to what extent they will pay that price. But it is, I think, a very definite calculation. And the potential sidelining of left wing or dissenting voices is very much part of that. It's the ultimate in not scaring the horses. From the Conservatives' point of view, the Conservatives, of course, have themselves moved to the right in order to try and combat the influence of Reform UK, which is getting an awful lot of coverage that perhaps its numbers don't truly deserve. So it's kind of inevitable that some people on the left, as it would have been of the Tory party, and maybe people from previous years, because Mr. Logan is not, I think, a recent MP, um, for some of them to be thinking that maybe they are comfortable with Labour. A similar thing happened with a few people in the 1996 1997 run up to that election. And I think it's part of the evolution of politics. But it does leave genuinely socialist thinking people and left wing voters in a bit of a quandary about who they support and if they decide to back Labour, what it is they are supporting.
Thank you. Um, Conservatives and Labour have been accused of misleading voters over their tax and spending plans, and of ignoring a potential £20 billion black hole in the public finances after the election. Carl Emerson, Deputy Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, said both parties have committed to reducing Britain's debt in the next 5 years. Carl Emerson told The Independent that, for better or for worse, that is going to require some combination of tax rises or spending cuts. Carl Emerson also brought up the fiscal drag that will occur if Rishi Sunak's 2022 tax threshold freeze remains in place. The effect is that, as inflation rises, millions are dragged into paying tax for the first time, while others gradually enter the higher tax bands. A third set of taxpayers who would have seen their taxable income decrease with higher thresholds will also lose out. William, do you feel like Labour and the Conservatives are being clear with their financial plans?
Um, is any party ever totally clear with its financial plans leading into an election? It seems very much as if the Conservatives are saying pretty much we've got a plan and what we've been doing is the plan and that would continue under us. And fiscal drag is very much part of that. Those tax thresholds are staying where they are under the Conservatives until 2028. And that's going to be a considerable impact on ordinary taxpayers, particularly at the lower end. So Labour, by contrast, just basically they're of course accused of not having a plan, but they do have a plan because they know what the Conservatives' plan is and they own a photocopier. So Rachel Reeves is pretty much saying we will do pretty well, the same things as the Tories were going to do, the same fiscal rules, and that is a constraint that could really cause the economy some damage and cause people damage going forward as well, I fear.
Thanks. For the Lib Dems, speaking ahead of the launch of the Scottish Lib Dems election campaign, Sir Ed Davey said he thought there could be more Liberals than Nationalists in the new Parliament. Speaking to BBC Radio Scotland on Monday, Sir Ed pointed to 4 seats north of the border his party were targeting, all of which are currently held by the SNP MPs. This included Inverness, Skye, West Roughshire, and one more that's missing from my script. I'm very, yeah, 4 SNP constituencies. I think the Lib Dem leader told BBC Radio Scotland, I think there is a massive desire to get rid of the Conservatives in Westminster and also actually to get rid of the SNP. What do you think of this statement, William?
Well, bad luck to Ed Davey and, of course, to his Scottish branch office manager, Alex Cole-Hamilton, because you won't get rid of the SNP at Holyrood, not in 2024, not in a Westminster election. It is quite possible that there will be more Lib Dems in the Parliament than SNP MPs, because at their high watermark, the Lib Dems achieved once 62 seats, I believe, and once 57 seats just in the last few elections. They've fallen back since they were part of the coalition with the Tories that began in 2010. But if they were to post that sort of figure, and it would be less, I think, by getting seats away from the SNP in Scotland than by winning seats where they're in second place in England, of which there are quite a lot in the south and west of England. So if they beat the Tories there, they could well end up with that sort of number, and that would make them the third biggest party. So to that extent, Ed Davey is right. But it's nice to see Ed Davey actually come out with some words rather than just doing stunts like going down water slides, which seems to have been his modus operandi up till now.
Thank you, William. Now we have the SNP. The SNP's Edinburgh West candidate, Ewan Hislop, was out campaigning today in Margaret Park, where I got to ask him what he's offering voters. We can play the video now. Patryk Witkowski of Broadcasting Scotland, reporting in from St Margaret's Park in Christorfin, Edinburgh, where SNP leader John Swinney, of Edinburgh West candidate Ewan Hislop, and Cabinet Secretary Marie McCallan are meeting for tea and a conversation with activists here. There's a big focus on young people amongst the conversations, and I'll be asking both Ewan Hislop and Mary McCallan what they can actually offer people that vote for them. Hello, Broadcasting Scotland. I'm here with Ewan Hislop on his campaign trail for Edinburgh West. Give a quick piece of a camera for me.
Hi everybody, hi, thanks very much for coming along. Yeah, so we're here today in St Margaret's Park, just to show support for our campaign across West Edinburgh. What we're saying to residents across this part of the city is that this election is about change. It's about ending 14 years of austerity and cuts, the hallmark of this Conservative government, and reminding people that the party that brought that in, that allowed that to come to, was the Liberal Democrats, and we shouldn't forget that. We're looking for a strong message to people to say that this is an election that's about change, and we can be part of that change here in West Edinburgh by voting out the Liberal Democrats, by sending an MP and a team of MPs across Scotland down to London who will challenge the cuts and austerity agenda, who will stick up for Scotland's interests, who will demand that the incoming Labour government end the austerity agenda, end cuts, invest in our public services, see real investment in our NHS, and also invest and put children first. Young people across Scotland have always been the priority of the SNP government. And we want to see a government in Westminster who holds the well-being of young people, children and young people in the same regard. We want to see investment in our public services and our communities, which alleviates child poverty, and that should be the focus of this campaign for Labour. They need to commit to ending and lifting the two-child cap. It's absolutely ridiculous that they've prioritised their fiscal rules over alleviating child poverty. 250,000 children on day one of lifting the two-child cap would be lifted out of poverty. That should be the priority. And so vote SNP, send MPs down to London that will make sure that Labour invest in our communities, invest in young people, end austerity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.
So I'm here today with the First Minister John Swinney and also with the local SNP candidate Ewan Hislop. We are here supporting Ewan, but also bringing a message, which is that we believe a generation of young people in Scotland have been let down by Westminster policies. And to put that a different way, people my age or thereabouts in Scotland have now lived virtually their entire adult lives under an austerity regime. Equally in that time, we have had Brexit foisted upon us, which has limited our opportunities to live, study and travel abroad, as well as damaged our economy. And of course we've had the Tory cost of living crisis, which has made it harder for young people to get on in life, to get mortgages and to succeed. All of these policies emanate from Westminster. The SNP is the only party who is for Scotland and standing up for Scotland against them. And equally, we're the only party offering real change from them. Change in the form of independence. Change in the form of rejoining the EU.
Right, and so you were talking to young activists today. What is it that is on the minds of young people exactly, and what kind of policies do you have planned to target that?
So there is a range. I mean, there's no homogenous group here, but if I can point to two overarching things that come out to me in the conversations that I'm having with young people just now. One is the economy and public services and the extent to which they feel they're able to succeed. And of course those issues of Brexit, cost of living, austerity, they're all very much bound up in that. I have to say the other issue, which is very much on the forefront of young people's minds in Scotland, is the issue of Palestine and the suffering that tens of thousands of people in Palestine are currently living through and indeed dying through. And I think, whilst not a political matter, I would take the opportunity to say that the lack of leadership that has been shown by the UK government and by Sir Keir Starmer on this is absolutely shocking, and I think young people in particular, can see through that.
Hi, I'm Jacob Ross. I'm YSI Lothian convener, and I'm also a student here at what I think Ewan Hislop and his campaign is being extremely. It's proud of the local area. It's championing the local area, and it's extremely proud of its candidate. I think Ewan is an excellent councillor, and he's done a lot for the area of Drumbury and Gyle, and I think that he could be, if elected to Edinburgh West, an extremely confident and strong voice for Scotland and Edinburgh.
There was a big focus on young people as part of the meeting today, and there were young activists coming out as well. What is it that young people could get out of the SNP, or what is it that they expect out of them?
Scotland was taken out of the EU, but not by choice. I think that ruined a lot of people's university experiences to travel abroad. A year abroad didn't help. I think that with independence and with the SNP, we can eradicate child poverty and make sure that when a young person grows up in Scotland, they grow up safe, they grow up healthy, and they grow up happy.
Thank you very much, Jacob.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.
That was my reporting. From Margaret Park. William, what did you make of some of the content there? What did you think of this commitment to young people, with the SNP talking about what they can promise, and what do you make of Ewan Hislop, if you have much of have an idea about him?
Well, Ewan Hislop obviously has a fair amount of experience as a councillor, which will stand him in very good stead if elected. He said a lot of good things. The focus on young people is also excellent. And I even heard the mention of independence twice. So, gosh, I've got to be impressed with that, haven't I? I think the SNP have to be a lot more upfront about independence, because it is actually their key selling point, and it is also the way to change properly things like being out of the EU, austerity. It's the thing that gives us the chance. Everything else we do bumps up against the limits of devolution. And that's one of the problems that always the SNP folk who are elected to Westminster have to face. And this new group, however big it is, will have exactly the same thing. So keep up the good work, but please, a bit more emphasis on independence, because it will get you votes. It really will.
And also, as a quick note before we finish off our general election section, William, what do you make of the news that the SNP hasn't been invited to the upcoming ITV general election debate, if you've heard about this?
Oh, I've certainly heard about it. I'm not particularly happy about it. I think they are currently the third biggest party at Westminster, and therefore they deserve a place just on the basis of that alone. It seems that it's being treated by ITV almost as a presidential type of election, with it being Sunak versus Starmer and nobody else. I would expect Ed Davey also to be particularly displeased about that side of things. And I think it's a distortion of democracy as it actually is practiced. And they should reconsider, but of course they won't, because that's the way it's going to be. And that will actually probably skew the way people think about it, which is very unfortunate.
Thank you, William. For our next story, we've got the Scottish Government publishing public sector pay policy. A new multi-year above-inflation pay strategy for the Scottish public sector will provide certainty for the workforce while improving public services for the people of Scotland. Finance Secretary Shauna Robison has said, the 2024 to 25 public sector pay policy sets out a framework for workers to receive an average 9.3% uplift over 3 years, providing above-inflation protection from forecast inflation rates of 5.7%. Finance and Local Government Secretary Shauna Robison said the framework can be used to take forward negotiations on pay and non-pay elements relevant to the individual sectors and workforces. Ms. Robinson said, the most valuable and important asset of public services is their workforces. Our approach to public sector pay in recent years means that people in key public sector roles in Scotland are now paid 6% more on average than in the rest of the UK, demonstrating that we have supported public sector workers during the cost of living crisis. This new above-inflation multi-year framework offers public sector workers certainty and a considerable degree of pay restoration when set against expected inflation forecasts up to 2027. It also continues our journey to build the Scottish economy and create the prosperity necessary to support people in Scotland, underlining our commitment to strong public services. Scotland thrives when the organisations that support the people of Scotland thrive, and it is my belief this new pay policy will support workers to achieve exactly that. Ms. Robison said, and continues, the Scottish Government operates on on an effectively fixed budget, limiting what can be delivered through pay policy. We have set out a fair framework within the limits of our budget. A change to UK spending plans would be required to increase spending on public services and public service workers. William, do you know if this pay plan meets the requests from all the campaigning and protesting of the public sector over the previous year or so, a year or two?
Well, I don't know if it will fully fit the requirements, but it has been a marked feature of the Scottish Government that they have been far more open to negotiation with the public sector workers and unions than their counterparts in England. And that's one of the reasons why in the last 12 months there have been far fewer strikes affecting public services in Scotland than there have been in England. And it looks as if that consultative, I'll get that word right sometime, but that kind of approach is being continued with what is posited as an above inflation increase over the next 3 years. That, of course, will depend on what happens with inflation. And if inflation is particularly high, then we'll need to think about how that works. And more money, yes, you've heard it before, would be needed in those circumstances from Westminster. But I think it's a good statement. I think it will lead to good negotiations, and I, I very much hope that the kind of peace that we've seen in the public services, and perhaps some improvement in the public services as a result of the money available, comes out in the next few years.
Thanks, William. Our next story is the COSLA is supposed to be meeting on this very topic tomorrow, so I guess we will get more information as to exactly how all of these public bodies feel and then what the government's ready to do. For our next story, we've got the... Yeah? Sorry, did you have a comment for that?
No? Agreeing with you there.
Oh, okay, great. For our next story, we've got the UK Chancellor saying that income tax threshold squeeze will continue until 2028. Jeremy Hunt has confirmed the 6-year income tax threshold freeze, which drags millions into paying higher rates and will last until 2028. The Chancellor's comments on what has been the UK's biggest tax rise on incomes in at least 50 years gives space for Labour to follow suit, meaning that taxes are likely to go up no matter who wins the general election. It came as both the Conservatives and Labour ruled out increasing VAT, income tax, and national insurance, in what a leading economics expert said was a move that risked limiting the options of a future government. Hunt blamed the tax rises on the pandemic and the energy shock. Speaking on Radio 4, he denied that the increased mortgage rates that were hitting families were the result of a Liz Truss mini-budget. Paul Johnson, a director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, IFS, said it was unclear what both parties had in mind when they ruled out increase in income tax. Quote, "We know it is baked into the numbers that increases in income tax are happening over the next 3 years, because thresholds and the allowances are being frozen, and that is a significant tax rise over the next few years. So you can find more ways of getting money out of these taxes without raising the rates," he said. Part of a problem with ruling out raising rates was that a chancellor or future chancellor was left with not very good options, and ended up being pushed into niche areas when it came to raising funds in the years ahead, he said. William, I suppose this matches into partially with our general election coverage, and I understand if you've said most of what you have to say about this there, but do you have anything to add on?
No, but I mean, we're having both parties telling us that taxes aren't going up, whereas in fact, simply by the fiscal drag, simply by leaving the threshold where it is till 28, they very much are. You said the biggest tax rise on incomes in at least 50 years. And I think Resolution Foundation has come up with a figure that averages about £40 billion per year additional taxes taken from working people over that period. And that is going to make life ever so slightly squeezed and harder, particularly if there's no further significant growth in the economy. And that's the other side of the coin. If you're taking money from people rather than allowing them to spend it in the economy, how do you achieve the growth that you say you need to develop the economy in later years? So whatever government comes in has got problems, no doubt about that.
Thanks, William. Our next story is 14 activists found guilty of conspiracy to commit subversion in Hong Kong 47 trial. 14 people have been found guilty in Hong Kong's largest national security trial, the prosecution of Hong Kong 47 pro-democracy campaigners, drawing condemnation from rights groups and Western government. In a verdict delivered today, a panel of judges handpicked by Hong Kong's government found 14 people had committed the national security offense of conspiracy to subvert state power by holding unofficial election primaries in 2020. The convicted included one organizer and 13 candidates. Almost all of them were former politicians. The 10-month trial finished in December, almost 3 years since the cohort had first been arrested. Among the guilty are former lawmakers and activists, including the politician Helena Wong, the veteran campaigner Leung Longhair Kwok Hung, the journalist Gwyneth Ho, and the dual Hong Kong Australian national Gordon Nig. The acting China director of Human Rights Watch, Maya Wang, said the convictions showed utter contempt for both democratic political processes and the rule of law. All Hong Kong wanted was a chance to freely elect their government. Democracy is not a crime, regardless of what the Chinese government and its handpicked Hong Kong court may say. Two defendants, the former district councillor Lawrence Lau Wai Chung and Li Yi Shun, a former social worker, were acquitted. The pair had run as candidates in the primaries and are the first acquittals to be granted after a prosecution under the 2020 National Security Law, NSL. However, the Justice Secretary's legal team said he would appeal against the acquittals. The judges agreed to extend most of the pair's stringent bail conditions in the meantime. 16 people were the only ones to plead not guilty from the group of 47 charged in early 2021 after mass dawn raids on their homes and offices by National Security Police. Most of the group have been jailed ever since. The 31 who pleaded guilty, including 4 who testified for the prosecution, are still awaiting the outcomes of their cases. The judges had decided to complete the trial of the others before moving on to sentencing. 45 convicted campaigners face sentences of up to life in prison. William, what does a situation like this mean for the political mood in Hong Kong?
I should think it's pretty grim. 600,000 voters voted in the primaries that were arranged in 2020, just 2 weeks after the 2020 National Security Law was passed. So I think there are quite a few people in Hong Kong with an interest in democracy, and they don't have it. There is no active political opposition in Hong Kong now, and there is the iron hand of what the Chinese want. That's what goes. Their candidates will be the ones who are up for election, not the candidates chosen by the people. It's grim, and this seems to be the way China does elections. Yeah, I don't see where we go from here, except if there are more protests. I'm sure they'll be quickly put down, and it's a problem as China increases its influence in the world. Just the sort of nation it's as we all suspected it was, but it's turning out to be.
Thanks, William. A quarter of political donations in EU go to extremist and populist parties. A quarter of all private money donated to political parties in the EU is going to far right, far left, and populist movements. boosting their finances by millions of euros before crucial European Parliament elections next week, with the polls predicting a rise in support for hardline conservative, Eurosceptic, and pro-Russian parties. 27 European news outlets, led by the investigations group Follow the Money, are publishing Transparency Gap, the most extensive analysis yet of political financing in the EU. The data was gathered from the annual reports of more than 200 parties across 25 countries. It shows €150 million, the equivalent of 128 million pounds, meaning that €1 in every €4 of all private donations made between 2019 and 2022 went to populist parties and those with the most extreme political views. Far-right groups have pulled in more than €97 million, equivalent to €1 in every €7 of private money. The project used the same party classification as research group The Populist, which defines those on the far right as having a nationalist and authoritarian ideology. While most countries oblige parties to declare their total income from private and public sources, rules vary widely, and financing in some member states is likened to a black box. Free quarters publish no information or only partial data on who the individuals or businesses are behind the donations they receive. A transparency gap exists even when parties are following their country's rules. The research found no signs of wrongdoing, but a major study commissioned by the European Parliament into political party funding concluded that a lack of transparency can lead to corruption risks. When other forms of funding are included, specifically membership and donations made by a party's own politicians or officials, hardline and populist parties captured 1/5 of money raised between 2019 and 2022, amounting to almost €500 million, the data shows. For far-right parties, the sum was close to €200 million, €1 in every 11. William, I suppose the first question here is, where do you think this money is coming from?
In some cases, with the far-right parties, it's coming from people who are fairly well off, small numbers perhaps of people with vested interests. It's not all right-wing parties, of course. In Greece and Portugal, the extreme parties, as they're called, are left-wing parties. So they'll be coming from those interests wherever that money arises from. And of course, there is a question about what extremism is, and if you ask Rishi Sunak about that, he might have a different view. But nevertheless, I suppose the thing also to remember about this is that still, in most countries, the majority of funding of political parties is from a public source, not a non-public source. So it's possible that mainstream parties, their supporters feel they're already well catered for by that, because by definition, they're in the mainstream and they're doing fairly well. So it could be that that's one of the reasons why the extremist parties are getting the majority in some cases and large proportion of money from non-public sources. But it is a little bit worrying as to just the trend in politics in Europe, as well as in many other places. The world is turning into a complicated and not always altogether pleasant place, and this may be part of that.
Thank you. For our next story, research finds cut in pollution from ships resulting in increase in global heating. Slashing pollution from shipping in 2020 led to a big termination shock that is estimated to have pushed the rate of global heating to double the long-term average, according to research. Until 2020, global shipping used dirty, high-sulfur fuels that produced air pollution. The pollution particles blocked sunlight and helped form more clouds, thereby curbing global heating. But new regulations at the start of 2020 slashed the sulfur contents of fuels by more than 80%. The new analysis calculates that the subsequent drop in pollution particles has significantly increased the amount of heat being trapped in the Earth's surface that drives the climate crisis. The researchers said the sharp ending of decades of shipping pollution was an inadvertent geoengineering experiment, revealing new information about its effectiveness and risks. High ocean surface temperatures smashed records in 2023, alarming experts who have struggled to explain the huge rises. But scientists have mixed views on the role played by the cut in shipping pollution. Those behind the new study say it could be a pretty substantial factor. Others say it is only a small factor, and that the reasons for the extraordinary rises in sea and global temperatures remain an alarming mystery. Dr. Tianli Wan at the University of Maryland, US, who led the study, said the estimated zero point 0.2 watts per square meter of additional heat trapped over the oceans after the pollution cut was a big number. And it happened in 1 year, and it's a big shock to the system, she said. The research published in the journal Communication, Earth and Environment combined satellite observations of sulfur pollution and computer modeling to calculate the impact of the cut. It found the short-term shock was equivalent to 80% of the total extra heating the planet has seen since 2020, from longer-term factors such as rising fossil fuel emissions. Other scientists think the temperature impact of a pollution cut will be significantly lower due to the feedbacks in the climate system, which are included in the most sophisticated climate models. The result of this type of analysis are expected later in 2024. Dr. Gavin Schmidt at NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies said the new research was definitely a positive contribution, but it's not using a fully coupled climate model. So there is still more work to be done. We'll see how this all gets reconciled over the coming months, he said. William, I suppose stories like this just show how difficult it is to predict all of these intermingling individual climate factors. What do you think can be done about that, and where do you see all of this heading?
Well, we're heading for a warmer planet, whatever happens. But yes, it's very, very complicated, isn't it? Because uh, it's kind of almost counterintuitive that stopping doing something that was polluting and bad, which was having all the high sulfur fuels in the oceans, and stopping that at a stroke would not immediately make things better in terms of global heating, but make things worse because it turned out that um, immediately cutting the pollution by 80% meant that you didn't have so much in the atmosphere that was blocking the sunlight and stopping the planet thereby from heating up. So that's an interesting one. And of course, there are some people who don't think even now that that's what happened. And there do need to be more studies done, and preferably as quickly as possible. And it's comforting to know that we'll get a fuller picture of everything that's happened later in the year. Because one thing is for sure, and that is that the planet heated up faster in 2023 than it had done for something like the previous 100,000 years. And we need to know if that's a one off, a start of a trend, or and if it's not this that's causing it, what is it? What do we need to do? I mean, maybe we suspect lots of it, but we need certainty here just to be able to react correctly to it, because if it is a runaway effect, we are in big trouble.
Thank you. And for final story of the day, the Scottish Government extend Clyde and Hebrides ferry contract for a year. The current contract to operate the Clyde and Hebrides ferry service (CHFS) network will be extended for a year. The Scottish Government's preferred procurement route for the next CHFS contract remains a direct award to CalMec. While good progress has been made on the comprehensive due diligence work associated with that approach, there are a number of complex issues still being considered before a final decision can be made. The additional 12 months will allow this work to be completed, whilst also providing a degree of certainty to staff and ferry user communities. Cabinet Secretary for Transport Fiona Hislop will provide a further update to the Scottish Parliament later this year. William, what do you make of this ferry contract?
Well, it seems very sensible. The government has said that it intends to procure from CalMac on an ongoing basis, and it's CalMac that the government has some influence over, and that does make sense. And despite the bad reputation that Scotland's ferries have got, the situation isn't actually as bad as all that compared to similar ferry services in other parts of the parts of the world. And the government stake in CalMac has got to have an effect sooner or later in improving things, and it will do with 6 new vessels coming into the fleet by 2026, and by a whole bunch of infrastructure improvements that are going on at harbours. So in the meantime, it makes sense to do a fair bit of due diligence, and to do that, if you buy yourself time by renewing the contract, which is probably what you're going to do long term anyway, for a year, it makes a lot of sense, and it just provides a wee bit of stability in somewhere where actually you do need a wee bit of stability.
Well, thank you very much. And that does wrap us up for this evening. Before I go, I want to remind you that Broadcasting Scotland depends on the generosity of our supporters. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our focus must now move to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. Thanks again to William Duguid. As always, it was lovely having you.
And it was lovely being here. I hope I didn't talk too much rubbish.
No, I think you were great, and I'm sure our viewers did too. And with that, we will say goodbye and thank you for watching.